Hey guys, hey, in this webinar, we're going to talk about what is probably the most important way to boost your immune system, the most essential ingredient for immune resilience, immune tolerance, just overall robust immune health. And so it's also probably the most overlooked piece of the puzzle as well. You know, a couple of webinars ago, I made a list of things that people usually say that we cannot live without, you know, and we started out with food and how we can live a number of weeks without food. And then we went to water and we can live a few days without water. And then we went to oxygen and, you know, we can live a few minutes without oxygen. And then we went to stimulation or neurological activation and just a very few brief moments without that before we pass away. But after water and before food, there's actually something that's far more essential, and it's sleep. You cannot live very long without sleep. You can live much longer without food than you can without sleep. And if you've ever tried, you know, this little experiment yourself and tried to go without sleep, I can pretty much guarantee that you probably caught a cold or maybe even something worse along the way. So you can relate. You know that when you try to skip on the sleep, it usually comes back to bite you, and that's with sickness, which of course forces you to sleep, right? And so, but sleep is a certainly a big topic. It's a topic that really requires a few weeks of explaining and understanding, and there's still a lot about sleep that we certainly do not know. However, sleep is really regulated on a clock, right? And it's based on our hormones, our biological clock, and so what's supposed to happen is when we wake up in the morning, we have this real high cortisol effect, and that's what kind of helps wake us up and get us going. And as the day goes on, our cortisol levels should wane. As they come down, it gives the opportunity for melatonin to start to rise. And everybody's probably heard about melatonin, and I often get questions about taking melatonin. And so when the melatonin starts to go up, the cortisol comes down. As the night wears on, the melatonin levels start to go down as the cortisol levels start to go up. And so we just kind of keep this delicate balance back and forth between melatonin and cortisol, right? And so, unfortunately, a lot of people live, again, back to this unnatural stress environment where they're under stress all day or they're under chemical stress all day. And we'll talk more about that here in just a second. And so that cortisol level stays elevated pretty much all day long. And so they never get this nice rise in melatonin. And so a lot of people will ask me about taking melatonin, and I'll say, you know, it's okay. I don't really necessarily have an issue with it, especially as we get older. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Um, but as if you're keeping your cortisol levels up here all day, adding a little bit of melatonin may help you get to sleep. But the problem usually is not necessarily the melatonin deficiency. I mean, there is a deficiency there, but it's not because you can't make melatonin. It's because you're keeping your cortisol levels up too high. So a lot of times the real question is not do you need more melatonin, but how do you start to lower those cortisol levels? And of course, that gets into the stress response and as well as a chemical response. And so during the day, a lot of times what's happening for a lot of people is their diet is actually what's causing the high cortisol, which actually causes them to store more fat. And we'll get into kind of some of the effects of that as well. But um, when you eat carbs, a lot of times the body perceives this immediate glucose spike in the body, right? So we eat carbs or we eat sugar. Carbs are primarily sugar, and we need them. I'm not saying don't, but we tend to overdo it, right? Just like most things, we overdo uh, some of the stuff, and we overdo the sweets or the carbs, and we don't back it up with much protein and healthy fats like we should. And so what happens is this big sugar spike hits the body, and the body says, uh-oh, I better release some insulin to deal with this sugar spike. And so it starts to release insulin. Now, the body assumes the best out of you. It assumes that you're going to follow that sugar with some protein and with some fats. And so that glucose level is going to stay high. So it starts to release some insulin, and there's a little bit of a delay. And so what happens is we release this insulin, but by the time the insulin gets to the level of the sugar has already cleared the system because it hits the body so fast that now we're stuck with this high insulin but low glucose situation. And so people oftentimes will go back and reach for something sugary to give them that next rush, right? And so they'll get that glucose back up again, but then the body says, "Uh-oh, we're going to have this over glucose situation," so it starts to raise insulin again. And this is basically what type 2 diabetes is we start to develop a resistance to the insulin because the body's just so saturated in it all the time, and there's no sugar to actually bring into the cell, so the body just kind of stops listening to that. But here's what happens on a cortisol effect. When that sugar level starts to drop, oftentimes before the person even goes to get the candy bar or whatever, they start producing cortisol. So cortisol, basically what it does is it helps as cortisol levels go up, it causes the liver to release sugar, and so sugar levels start to go up. And so what they're doing all day is instead of eating regular small meals throughout the day, they're just doing this with their cortisol insulin all day long. So this cortisol is constantly getting ratcheted up. Well, again, if cortisol is high, your melatonin levels are going to be low, right? And so the other thing that happens during sleep, which is we know that melatonin really does help the immune system a lot. But when we sleep and we get good sleep, we actually release a lot of other chemicals and hormones like growth factor peptides and other growth hormones that really prime the immune system to make it ready to fight anything that comes its way so that it strengthens what's called the innate immune system so that stuff doesn't get a foothold on us. And so, if you really are serious about improving your immune system, don't go reach for a handful of supplements. Look at your sleep. Ask yourself, are you getting high quality sleep? High quality sleep is really sleep that when you wake up in the morning, it's right before the alarm. So you're waking up without the alarm actually waking you. Or you're starting to awake before the alarm, and you wake up feeling refreshed and renewed. That's a good indication that you're getting high quality sleep. The reason that I think the most common reason that people don't get high quality sleep is that they simply stay up too late, right? We have artificial lights and things like that now, and so people are staying up past the time that they should be. Back in the old days before we had electricity and those things, there really wasn't a lot you could do at night. You couldn't see, you got hurt, you could sit around the fire for a little while, but for the most part, you settled in and went to bed. Now we start watching TV, we stay up way too late, and so we really start to shortchange ourselves on the sleep, and we start really lowering that immune system. Some of the other problems that I see with people are when they can't stay asleep. And sleep is complicated. I'm certainly not going to answer all sleep questions in this webinar, but one of the most common reasons for waking up in the middle of the night is actually what we already talked about, that hypoglycemic effect. So because they're eating too many carbs during the day, too much sugar during the day, they're not balancing it with good high quality protein and good high quality fats. And so at night, their sugar levels start to plummet. As it plummets, the body's response is to raise cortisol. And as it raises cortisol, cortisol shuts off melatonin production and wakes the person up. If this is kind of what's going on with you, and if you've ever found that if you eat something, you can go back to sleep, that's what's occurring with you. And sometimes I'll recommend, hey, trying to eat something right before bed, something with some high fat, like, nuts or something like that, and see if you don't sleep a little bit later or sleep a little longer before you wake up. And if you do, that's what's occurring. You're having these hypoglycemic events, and you really need to change your eating habits during the day, not your eating habits at night. The other reasons a lot of times that people wake up are, of course, prostate problems or an overactive bladder. Both of those are really hormonal disruptions, and there's a lot going on with that. One of the other big reasons is weak pelvic floor. So the pelvic floor is just weak. They can't hold the bladder as well. And that really gets back to breathing. What we're discovering is that most weak pelvic floor issues are actually a diaphragm issue. And so people aren't breathing correctly. Their lumbar spine, thoracic spine isn't able to move correctly. So that's a lot of times, again, not that I'm trying to promote chiropractic, but this is one of the reasons that chiropractic helps with so many things, is it just kind of helps the body move more freely. And as we work on core and get that diaphragm moving better, a lot of times those weak pelvic floor issues do better. Some other tips I'd have for you for a good sleep is, white noise has been shown to really help you get to sleep and stay asleep for longer periods of time. Turn off the electronics a couple hours before bedtime. Electronics are doing better. They have blue light blockers now, but if you're um, sitting on an electronic thing, before bed, that blue light actually stimulates your pineal gland, which suppresses melatonin production. And so that's one of the reasons that it can take a lot longer to fall asleep when you lay in bed, is if you've been stimulating that pineal gland through electronics prior to going to bed. The bed really is primarily for to go to bed, right? So when you get in bed, don't turn on your phone. Don't turn on the electronics. That's where you need to sleep and perform other parasympathetic activities, if you know what I mean. But that's really the two uses for the bed. And then, if you are finding that you're not getting good high quality sleep, or, maybe you stayed up and went out with friends a little bit, you know, take a nap the next day. Naps actually do help, not a sleep, but a nap during the day, does also help to a degree with the immune system, and can kind of start to get that sleep situation regulated. So again, now sleep is complicated and it takes time. So really now is the time to be, really focusing on getting that high quality sleep, get that immune system built up. And so again, if you have specific questions, reach out. If you like the information, like us on Facebook, like us on YouTube, give us a shout. And so I hope you enjoyed today's webinar, and hopefully you'll turn in for the next one. Stay healthy, stay well out there.